Hey everybody, welcome to PC Perspective. I'm Ryan Shrout, joined by new friend Lance Madsen, Principal Engineer of Awesomeness at Aimpad, which is a company that maybe not a lot of our viewers are familiar with yet. Right. And you do a really unique thing, and we've been talking back and forth for way too long, and I apologize for how long it took me to figure out how to get you down here. You only live a couple hours away or so it made perfect sense for you to come down and kind of talk to the audience, and let's talk about analog keyboards, which blew my mind the first time I heard about it. Didn't really make a whole lot of sense, but the idea of analog key switches or analog inputs through keyboards is actually pretty compelling. So before we jump into the tech, and we have some demos we're going to show you guys, and we'll go through all the questions about what this is going to cost you, and when can you buy it, and what are the abilities that it adds for PC gaming. Tell me a bit about like your history, your background, where you came from, and why this was a project that you wanted to start.
Yeah, sure. So I've worked in IT for the past 15 years or so, and just have always liked computers and technology and all that type of stuff. So it's what I've always been engaged with. But about 5 years ago, I sat down with some people at a conference, and we're just kind of sitting around at dinner and talking and trying to figure out that what they wanted to do is they wanted to invest in anything. And they're like, hey, do you have any ideas of things? And so I had this concept in my mind for a long time of this analog keyboard, or the ability to like measure how far down you push a key on a keyboard and translate that to movement or things like that. And there's lots of games that I played in the past that it always irked me that you're either running full speed or stopped, running full speed or stopped, and that was like a jarring experience, and I felt that it could be improved somehow. And I wasn't sure then exactly how we were going to do it, but we've just spent the past 5 years developing, prototyping, and running through several iterations until we have finally matured it to the point where we feel it's manufacturable and cheap enough to actually implement.
It's interesting because when you think about keyboards, the kind of revolution or kind of revitalization of the keyboard market in general over the last, let's say 5-7 years, has been all about like what types of switches you have and what the tactile feel or sound of the keys are, but nothing in terms of any real adjustment otherwise, right?
Correct.
When you first said that, I was like, well, I don't know, the mouse is my analog input into the PC. Do I really need it in a keyboard, right? And it was interesting that you took that so I was like, how can we implement that into something that people are very familiar with and they already use, as opposed to like just defaulting to use a controller, right? Which is something that a lot of people do, and on PC gaming, it's still fairly popular, right? And that's something that's growing, but there are a ton of people keyboard, mouse only, but you've got some interesting ways to kind of show how the analog switches, or is it fair to call it an analog switch? I keep saying that, but
yeah, it's accurate. It's switch typically implies it's going to be on or off type switch, but there is variable switches.
So how did you start the development of this? You came up with the idea through these conversations, and then what?
So the first thing we did was we took an Xbox 360 controller and just ripped it apart, and then threw on a couple of sensors. Our initial implementations were pressure sensors. So based off of how hard you push this thing down, it translated it, and it worked. But what I found is pressure is kind of a poor measurement, because there's no distinct, like, am I pushing it as hard as I possibly can? You start pushing pressure, and you more pressure and more pressure and more pressure, and I was like, am I moving as fast as I possibly can? But there's no way to convey that with pressure.
Was it the PlayStation 3 controllers that did that for the first time? They had like pressure sensitive buttons
on the buttons for like Gran Turismo and stuff like that. And most people, at least the impression I've got, is think it's crap. Like it's like you just push it down. It's like really hard to control because that throw is super small.
There's a very small throw on those.
And it's not until you actually apply pressure to the button. So you don't want a situation where you're pushing a button down and nothing happens, but that's what the case was until you actually start like smashing the
threshold of
Right. So we found that type of input for this application was just not very good. So we actually came up with a lot of different ideas and concepts, and one of our engineers decided ultimately the cheapest and best option would be infrared sensors, because they're relatively cheap and you can get commodity parts for them relatively easily. So,
so you use infrared to measure how far down you're pushing the key. I know we had discussions before we started about how much you wanted to show and talk about because some of it was very proprietary. But like, give me an idea of how does that work? Do you have an infrared light on the top of the keycap that is measuring as it goes?
Actually, our very first ones did actually do that, but then we found that by measuring the keycap itself, it was so far away that you could have like wobble and all sorts of wacky stuff that could happen. So we scrapped all that too. But basically, this is a Cherry MX switch, and that's the RGB version of it, basically.
Okay.
But if you look at it from the bottom of the switch and then you push in the little stem from the top, you'll start to see some type of movement or motion in there.
Yeah.
And typically, I mean, since you can see it, a sensor can sense the exact same thing. So all we're doing is shining an infrared LED through that enclosure, and then it's bouncing off the switch, and then we're just measuring how bright the light comes.
You're just measuring the intensity of, okay.
So the more that you push it down, more light gets reflected into it, and we know that it's getting closer.
Okay. Well, how accurate can that measurement be with the size of sensors being is that you have to have one underneath each switch that you're trying to measure?
So it's funny because the manufacturing tolerances in Cherry switches are very, very good, but they're all different. So that switch compared to another switch, even though they're exact model,
red, brown, blue, all that stuff.
Well, not even that, just like the red switches themselves. If you take one red switch, another red switch, it's going to have different properties, different amount of plastics and fiberglass material binded into it.
Okay.
So there's lots of variance in all this. But typically what we can do is we don't really care what amount of light is coming through as long as we get some. But you want the complicated answer or the short answer?
I kind of want the complicated answer, but I mean, whatever you think is best for the audience, right? Like it's
right. So it's something I geek out a lot over more than I probably should, but it's basically
you're developing the product. If you're not doing it, nobody's going to.
So all we really care about is the bottom and the top of the switch, whatever that value is. This value could, and we're saying counts, okay? A count is how much light is getting reflected, and that's just an indirect measurement that we are converting into voltage.
Okay.
But basically, so we have this lower value and this high value. Let's say this high value is 2,000 counts and this lower value is 1,000 counts. So from that top to the bottom, there's 1,000 levels of pressure that allow you to measure. What the other switch might be 1,200 to 2,000, so it's 800 levels. But we don't really care because 800 levels on a 4 millimeter press, it's very difficult for someone to like push the key down and get 800 levels of sensitivity. So, I mean, I probably could because I'm good, but other people
you have a lot of experience testing analog switches as well. Yes.
But the short answer essentially is plenty. Like anyone that can finally press in the key 4 millimeters is going to be able to accurately control anything they want to, even more accurate than like an Xbox controller or something like that.
Does that affect on the software side or either the firmware side? Like, do you have to do calibration per?
So actually, our earlier prototypes, there was a manual calibration process that we would run through, but now it's all automated, so we don't really care what's happening on the keyboard. You just start using it and it calibrates itself.
So that's how it kind of physically works, electronically works. How does it work in terms of interfacing with the computer? Like if I just bought this keyboard and plugged it in, would I get analog capability? Does it require specific driver support?
Yeah, it is designed to be as simple and easy to use. So if you go into Device Manager after plugging this in, what happens is a keyboard gets loaded, and an Xbox 360 controller gets loaded, and a mouse gets loaded. So from the computer's perspective, you just plugged in 3 devices with that one cable.
Okay.
So anything that supports those devices just instantly starts working. And typically, nowadays, most games are developed with an Xbox 360 controller in mind. So that's why we've kind of programmed the device to behave like an Xbox 360 controller because it just works.
Right. So, and I want to point out to people who are watching the stream, if you go to pcpro.com/live, we have a chat there. And if you have questions, send them in the IRC chat to me. Just ping my name on them and I'll see them come up and I'll add them to the list of documents. If you have questions as we go, please feel free to do that. So that's interesting. So it adds you, and I also wanted to point out something, or at least ask, I guess, that this doesn't affect the feel of the keyboard if you're just using it as a keyboard, if you're just typing, right? Like,
correct.
Because you're not changing, you're measuring light, so you're not, there's no physical effect on the switch. So whatever cherry switch or whatever else you're using is going to feel and act the same, right?
Yep, exactly, identical. We don't actually adjust anything with the switch at all. It behaves just like a cherry switch in a normal keyboard mode.
Yeah.
So if you're used to typing on a Cherry MX Red keyboard, it's going to feel exactly like a red keyboard because it is just a normal red keyboard.
Okay. Okay. So we've brought up this. You brought this laptop to go through a couple of demos and show things. So after you've plugged it in, and now your device manager is going to show you a keyboard and a mouse and an Xbox controller, which is very interesting already to talk about. Why is it giving you three devices? Is it you can switch between modes on the keyboard and then
exactly? So kind of what I'll show through these demos is there's kind of profiles that are set up for specific purposes that you might have for whatever reason. And so generally, if you're going to be gaming, you want it to behave like the Xbox 360 controller if you want that analog movement that we'll demonstrate. But there's other times where it actually is useful to have like a mouse, for example, in office cases or things like that, because you would be typing along on your keyboard, and if you want to use the mouse, you have to lift up your hand and grab the mouse and click and then come back to the home row and start typing. But if you don't want to leave the home row, you could hit a button and move the mouse and keep on going without having to swap back and forth.
Interesting. Okay.
So I can show that as well.
Yeah.
So to kind of get you started here, on the screen we have this kind of virtualized Xbox controller, and this measures the keys that are being pressed at the time. So
this is not software. Just to be clear, this is not software that you guys wrote or created. This is stuff in the community, in the market, in the industry. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. Both of these products are not ours. They're free on GitHub somewhere. I can't remember where.
Sure.
But, so basically, this program is going to show what an Xbox controller is doing that's plugged in. So if I push this D key in just a small amount, you'll see that this little stick here is moving.
Oh, okay.
And it also gives the raw measurements of what is happening on there. If I push the key in far enough, it will actually register a key press. So there's two things that are kind of happening on this keyboard as you push that single key. Not only is it pushing the analog stick in one direction, but it's also activating a keyboard key press at the bottom, because you don't want to get in a situation where you want to trash talk to someone and the WASD keys don't send a WASD message, otherwise your message sounds stupid and you're no longer effectively trash talking. So
that's true. That is inverse of trash talking. Actually.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So actually, that's an interesting point. So like, if you hit the hotkey to chat and you start to type, is it also going to send those analog signals before it, like, as you press through it, it's going to send the analog signal as you hit W or
yes,
whatever,
it will.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So depending on how the game is programmed, when you hit that chat key, if it freezes all other like game input and just lets you type, if it doesn't, then potentially you could be moving a character around while you're typing.
I gotcha.
But yeah, so we spent a lot of time on trying to find this perfect balance of being able to allow people to smoothly control the analog controls without sacrificing the typing, because you have situations of, well, do you have to throw away some of that analog stuff in order to not have them conflict with each other and things like that. But I think we found a pretty good happy balance without sacrificing too much of that analog range. But so that's generally how this is all working from a interfacing perspective, that this is what the game sees when you push a key. And I can combine keys at the same time, both the A and the D key, to get any angle that I want and any intensity that I want based off of pushing those keys in together.
So when you go into the game, do you have to change any of the in-game settings then for, as long as it has support for a controller, it should by default accept the input that you have there?
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
We want it as painlessly as possible to be able to just plug it in and start using it without having to like mess around with software and stuff like that. So.
Right. Interesting. Now, I noticed on here, how many analog switch implementations are on this keyboard?
So on this particular keyboard, we actually have 12. So there's Q, W, E, R, A, S, D, F, and the 4 arrow keys.
Okay.
When you're using an Xbox 360 controller as the lowest common denominator, you only have the 2 thumbsticks and the 2 analog triggers. So you have a full limiting. It's limited on the amount of keys that you can actually make analog and still be usable on that same interface.
Right.
There's you can use like direct input and things like that have far more, but there's very few games that actually use direct input nowadays. They've all kind of converted over to using the Xbox controller. So it doesn't make sense. We could theoretically make them all analog, but it's like, well, all right, this is the right thumbstick, and this one's also the right thumbstick, and this one also is the right thumbstick. It doesn't effectively make a difference in the game, right?
Okay. Do you envision a instance or a future or like a time where a keyboard API would exist, like where maybe a game would be able to directly map this as opposed to Xbox controller emulate, and then maybe you take advantage of more analog keys?
I think it would be really nice. I just don't think many developers would be willing to do it, at least until this type of stuff takes off.
Yeah.
So this is kind of the first stepping stone.
From a like time investment, money investment on their side, yeah.
Right, and yeah, if we had tons of cash to like say, hey, we'll pay you $1 million if you like program this thing specifically.
Which we see a lot nowadays in that industry, to get specific key things in, eye tracking, whatever have
right,
you. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's what it would take, and at this point, it's not feasible for us to try to market that. And the goal fundamentally has always been it should be simple and easy not only for the user but for the developer to implement. And since if they're already going to develop for the Xbox controller, that's all we really care about. Just do what you're going to do, and we'll support it.
Okay. Okay. Now that was one of the modes.
Yeah. So essentially, the way that we select profiles on this is a prototype. I don't think a full retail product would look like this, but I hold down the function key and I can use F1, F2 to switch to different things all the way up through F6. So
Okay.
F1 is designed for like first-person shooters or action games, like maybe side-scrolling or like twin-stick shooters, things like that. But when you go to F2 mode, this is for driving, and the keys will turn this greenish color. The reason why driving is different than first-person shooters because say you're playing like Grand Theft Auto and imagine you're using an Xbox controller. When you are on foot, you're running around with that left thumbstick and then you hit a key to enter into a vehicle. You no longer use that thumbstick to drive forward. You have to use the right trigger to make your car. So we have to remap on the fly, but still let the game think you're still using an Xbox controller. So no longer is WASD going to be the left thumbstick. It's going to be a combination of the thumbstick to move left and right, but the W key will now be mapped to the right trigger, and the S key will be mapped to the left trigger.
Okay.
So it's a fundamental issue. Since you can't remap keys that are programmed for the Xbox controller, we have to remap it on the keyboard itself.
Okay. Okay. All right.
So that's that basic one. This F3 mode, this is more designed for flight simulators and things like that. So it tries to put everything into one area. So we have WASD as the left thumbstick, Q and E as the right and left trigger, and R and F as the right thumbstick. And by using those combination of keys here and the mouse at the same time, it gives you full 6 degrees of freedom movement for simulator games like Star Citizen or things like that, where you want full control over a spaceship in every possible direction. You can do that now with full analog control.
Have you experimented with any where like both hands are on the keyboard at all, or is that like mind blowing for consumers to use?
You could do it. It's
like you mentioned a twin stick shooter a second ago, and I was thinking like, could I do that with the arrow keys and like?
So yeah. So with these little arrows or the thumbsticks here, I can control both of them at the same time if I want to. My personal thing is if I'm going to aim, I should be using a mouse. Otherwise, I'm handicapping myself.
Yeah. And for PC gaming, you're correct. Yeah.
So that's why I think we might actually sacrifice the arrow keys at some point, because unless people specifically want to use them for driving or whatever reasons.
Right.
I don't feel it's as compelling as the other keys over here.
Okay.
So this next mode is a little more difficult to explain, but I'll try.
All right.
So throwing out all the analog stuff out of the way, we know where the key is being pushed, right? So that means we're not restricted to the normal cherry activation when we want to send a key press of W, and it activates those two physical electrical connections. So we can say, well, I don't want to activate here. I want to activate at the very, very top of the key press. So this mode, basically, just by me sticking my finger right on top of there, you can see that R key is lighting up. I'm just barely touching the key because it's activating right at the very top of the key press.
Okay.
So this is probably marketing speak, but if you're playing League of Legends or something and you need to push that R key that split second faster than the other team, if you get your ultimate ability off faster than the other team, then I can activate it just that split second faster. We're talking about milliseconds of speed.
Yeah, key throws.
But if other key manufacturers are going to tout that, oh, well, our key doesn't activate at 2 millimeters, it activates at 1.2 millimeters, And that's what they're saying. Well, I can do it at 0 millimeters. I can't go any less than that, right? So that's one thing.
So what happens if you do that and you do continue to press it all the way down and activate the normal switch? Because you control that in software, you can just not send like the second click of it?
Like you mean the key press?
So you're activating it through the infrared initially, and then it activates through the switch, the
we
cherry
disable
switch
that
itself.
part.
Okay.
Yeah, so in this mode, we disable the cherry activation, so it just is ignored, basically, if it happens.
Okay.
So,
and that happens on the keyboard level, not in the Windows driver level.
Right, yeah. So one of my fundamental design principles was always to make it stand alone by itself. So you shouldn't have to have any software to program it. You should just plug it in, and it should just fundamentally work without too much effort.
Yeah.
I think eventually we'll have to program some of the stuff in software because a lot of it gets subtracted pretty quickly and it gets difficult to use. But the other advantage of this type of mode is now that we have that ability to measure where the key is, we can actually activate two things at the same time in that same key press. So in this mode, let's say the R key is set at the very top. If I want to enable a second keystroke underneath it, I can do the FN key in R, and now that will activate a second key press under that same one. So when I push in the R key a little bit, you'll see it gets R is lit up there. If I push it down further, the P key will light up as the second one. So I can activate all these other keys all still within my hand space here. I don't need to reach over to reach them. Now, where that would be useful is a few different things. So I mentioned like League of Legends, for example. There's lots of skill shots that you have to like line up how far you're going to throw a spell or how big of an area effect it might have. Right. So the way you can do it is you can lightly put your finger on that key, and that will show the area effect of the spell, and then you push it down all the way and it will activate the spell. So people that are just learning the game, they don't know exactly how far a spell may go or how they need to situate themselves. Right. They can use that to kind of help them guide in new characters and things like that.
But it does require you to hit the first key press first before you can hit the second one, right, to get through it. Right.
So you would want layered abilities. So one would be showing where the effect would be, and then the second one would be initiating.
I don't know if it exists in any games, but you can see like the first key press bringing up the scope of something, right, and
holding your breath.
And when you push it all the way down, it fires or does whatever the secondary. Okay,
that's the same things like in RPGs and stuff like that. You might have, well, I just want to cast a single fireball, so you just hold down a little bit and then push it down, and 3 fireballs come out, or things like that. So that's the whole point of that. The last one is the mouse control that I like because it's just something fun to do. But I do have the ability to control the mouse cursor completely using, in this case, I'm using ESDF to do it. But I can control everything from the mouse cursor to window position and
mouse buttons
and everything, as well as the scroll wheel. So if I open up a web page and scroll through it, I can sit back on my desk and have this keyboard on my lap and scroll through web pages and things like that. So,
I mean, is that generally used for that type of purpose? In your mind, right, as opposed to anything that requires a whole lot of like quick precision.
Right. I mean, I wouldn't want to play a first-person shooter aiming with a mouse like that, for example. But in my case, I think it's useful that you can switch back and forth to different modes quickly. So as I was showing that one concept of this normal keyboard mode and typing, so I could be typing along on my, I'm in the wrong mode. Here we go. Typing along here on my word processor or whatever, and then I can hit this button. So I've had this nice little keycap that I've had printed that allows you to now move to the mouse cursor to select text or something like that, and then switch it back again and go back to typing. So I don't have to do this type of function. So, and the last one is just the basic keyboard. It's functionally just a normal keyboard. There's nothing special about it.
Right.
So that's the
and in
overall.
fact, like this prototype is built on it's a production chassis, right, from
Cooler Master.
Cooler Master, right? And you guys basically tore it apart, built a new PCB, put it back in there using the same keycaps?
No, these ones are fancy double shot keycaps. Yeah,
okay. So that's a walkthrough of the demos and the profiles. Do you have any, show us a game of it running? Like I'm just...
So people may ask, like, so how compatible is this in games, right? So if they want, they could go to our website at aimpad.com/compatibility, and we have a list of all the games that I've personally tested that I know are functional. So there's a lot. So are you familiar with this game, Race to the Sun?
I am not.
All right, so I'm going to just start off in this normal keyboard mode. And the way that we typically play this game is you have to tap to precisely like get yourself there. So you can see it's kind of a jarring experience, but it's what as a PC gamer using a keyboard is used to, that they have to just constantly.
And with the increase in like quick serve games that have been coming out to the PC market, there's a lot of this type of stuff in there, I feel like.
Yeah, there is. Now, so this is definitely playable using it in normal keyboard mode. It's fine. It's like just what you would expect. But I feel like it's lacking a connection with the game of what you're like trying to actually do. Right. So I'm going to switch it now to this Aimpad mode, or the analog mode, and then based off of how far down I push the keys, you'll see how much it will.
There's definitely the gliding aspect of it.
Right. So I feel like I'm easing it through these curves based off of how I'm pushing it. And I do have direct control of where I want to move and how fast I want to move. So I could still play the game tapping back and forth like I wouldn't want to, but if someone were trying to get used to using this type of control mechanism, they could still do it without actually using it effectively.
Is this something that you feel like people just pick up and understand right away, or is this more of a, like, if you wanted to play this and play it well, you need to take a little bit to figure out, like, how much force does it take to move left and right with this analog input? Is it a feel over time?
It definitely is. The funny thing is, I like to use this game for people that don't play games very often at all. And my favorite thing to do is just have them use it in the normal keyboard mode and say, you just play this game for a little bit and kind of get used to it. And then I have them switch it to this mode, and I say, so what do you think about it? And they're like, I don't know why. It feels better, but I don't know why. And that alone is satisfying to me, that it made a difference without them even realizing why. And it doesn't really matter. If it feels better, then I feel like I've kind of succeeded. But as they get used to it, and as it is apparent to them, like how I actually push that key actually matters now, then it is more of a compelling gaming experience.
Interesting. That's, So any game that has Xbox controller support built into it should fundamentally work with the ideas. Are you finding that there's a lot of, or some instances where, due to control implementations or something like that, where it requires like switching modes or something like that, and it's not?
So I can't say that it's 100% compatible with every game for that analog stuff. Worst case, you just turn off the analog stuff and use it as a normal keyboard. So you don't lose anything by doing it, but there are definitely games out there that developers haven't thought of this combined joystick, gamepad, mouse type input. So they either assume wrongly that you're going to plug in an Xbox controller, so you're just going to use an Xbox controller, nothing else. But that does tend to happen every once in a while. But there's far more games that do support the combined than don't. But generally speaking, it can be a problem. But I don't think it is. Yes, except, okay. So let me kind of get out here real quick. So this is Saints Row the Third, if you're familiar with it, very much like Grand Theft Auto. But this game has actually very good analog movement. Based off of how far down you push it, you can get a nice variance of speed of movement. But as I was mentioning, getting into a vehicle, actually let's get a better car. I have some standards.
The always inevitable live game demo dilemma.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to drive a dump truck. Oh, here we go. That looks sporty. All right. All right, so now we're in this driving mode. And I could drive the speed limit if I wanted to, because I now have the ability to. But I have nice, smooth controls left and right to drive. Versus if I were to switch it back to the keyboard mode, it's full speed ahead, and I have to tap.
Yes, when I'm playing GTA 5, that is what I look like. That is correct.
That is an accurate representation.
So now, the mode switching that you're going through, that's kind of specific to this third world or third person perspective, like open world game, where you are both controlling an individual and also then controlling a car, right? Where you kind of have to switch. Do you have to switch, or is it just a preference of yours, or is it?
So if you don't switch, and we switch it back to here, if I push the W key, it technically is still going to work because the W key press is still happening. So it's still going to be full acceleration, but I can still smoothly turn left and right up until I get to the key press. Okay. So yeah, it's not the greatest, but you could also map it. So I actually mapped the arrow keys to do the same thing. So now, if I wanted to, I could use them back and forth.
So if you want to have both modes kind of enabled at the same time, you just move your hand as opposed to adjusting
and a lot of people that play this type of game might have an Xbox controller already plugged in and maybe sitting on their lap, so they'll come here and
I know a lot of that with Battlefield would happen when you get into a jet or something like that. Yeah, a helicopter for sure, right? Yeah, where it's like, I don't have the ability to do what I want to do there, so, okay.
But if you want to do like a drive-by or something like that, you want to aim with the mouse at the same time. So I wouldn't want to use the joystick to aim with my drive-by. I want my precision killing machine to happen.
I mean, look, mouse and keyboard is best for a reason.
This is true.
And if you're improving on the keyboard fundamentally, that's pretty compelling stuff.
Ideally, don't want any drawbacks, but all the benefits.
Yeah, interesting. Any other game demos you want to go through, or you want to? We've got some questions and stuff coming in.
Sure.
Like I want to know, when can you buy it?
When can you buy it? Yeah. So basically, our business model is to license the technology. So we've patented this whole concept and the specific implementation, as well as kind of some general applications of it. So our business model is to basically license that patent to people that already make keyboards and gaming keyboards and things like that. We learned pretty quickly that we weren't too interested in dealing with retail and returns and customer support and all that type of stuff.
It's a much different beast, yes.
Definitely. So that's what our efforts have been. We've made a pretty good headway with different companies and think that it will come shortly, but I don't have a time frame yet on when that will happen.
So you're not selling keyboards. You're not like these that we see here are prototypes, and you go to the website. You can't pre-order this. You can't buy it or anything like that. These are ones that you make to send out to reviewers and people you're trying to convince to license and buy your technology and that type of stuff. Okay.
Correct. Yeah.
You're confident at this point that you're going to have keyboards released with this tech in it?
I'm relatively confident, yes. I think
this year, 2017.
2017. It would be a bold.
Yeah.
I can't say for sure, but probably 2018 would be my guess.
Okay. I mean, that's like just watching the chat. There's a lot of people that have interest in this already.
Sure.
Right? And have you seen that? I mean, it's something you've been working on for a long time. Have you seen, I imagine it's hard to send out products for review and come on this and do an interview and talk about it, and then people go, oh, that's awesome, I want to give you money, right? Like, please take my money so I can buy this thing, and you go, well, actually,
It's a fine balance that I tried, because we haven't done a whole lot of marketing efforts other than trying to just get the word out that this is coming, that this is something that I think is compelling, and others as they think about it, because this type of concept takes a while to think about, and for it to become part of something like, I think that's something I would be interested in. Once it's available, then maybe I'll buy it. But we went to PAX East 3 years ago. We had a really rough prototype back then. But the response was always like, wow, that's I hadn't really thought about that, or that's really kind of cool. And so we knew we were onto something, but we actually had a Kickstarter running at the same time, but that was our primary marketing effort, was Kickstarter, and without having a base to build it up. So I didn't do any type of things at streams like this or any type of effort to market it, which I think is why our Kickstarter ultimately failed. But we got to the point where we felt that it was compelling enough that I would rather it be in every keyboard out there, that if you're going to buy a gaming keyboard, it shouldn't just have RGB and macro keys and things like that. It should actually be a gaming specific application in order to be a true gaming keyboard.
I mean, it's a really compelling argument, and obviously from your standpoint, driving excitement and interest here and being able to take that to potential customers and say, we've proven that there's demand for this.
Exactly.
You want to license this into your product and develop it that way. So, Interesting. What about and this is something you're probably not going to answer either, but like added costs, right? Like so, is there a significant cost increase to add this type of technology to a keyboard, and then how much of that is minimized by 12 keys as opposed to all keys being implemented with the tech?
Yeah. So. Again, in order to convince a big company that makes lots and lots of keyboards, the cost can't be astronomical. Otherwise, it's like, oh, well, yeah, it's awesome technology. Let's buy a $300 keyboard.
Right.
No one realistic. I mean, I can't say no one. There are some people that say, I'll pay you $500 for your keyboard right now. But realistically, it has to be in a range that's applicable to the mainstream, right? So most mechanical gaming keyboards now are between 100 and 150-ish. Around there, higher end ones, maybe 179, 189, or whatever. But to answer your question, if you were to take a basic keyboard, basic mechanical keyboard, and tack on like $20, $30, that's where we would kind of feel like it's a fair price, that it's not so far out there that people aren't going to latch onto it. But we feel that if you were to take a basic keyboard and add $20 to $30 on top of it, it's about the same cost as what an Xbox 360 controller might be. And we feel that that's probably a fair cost, and where it will probably shake out to be.
That's what you're aiming for in terms of production costs, license costs, all that type of stuff added.
Right.
Okay. So if you guys have questions if you're watching the stream, you have questions, go to pcpro.com/live, put them in the chat. I've got a couple here lined up.
Okay.
Linux support has been asked a few times already. Is that something that is integrated now?
It already works. I've tested. So the Xbox controller in general is supported. You do have to manually load a driver. So since the vendor ID and product ID of this particular keyboard is not registered with that driver, you just say this product ID, this vendor ID, map it to this driver, and it loads, and it works in all the games that I've tested.
Right.
It does work out of the box with Linux. So.
Okay. That's good. We get that question a lot. No matter what we're streaming about or talking about, people always want about Linux drivers, Linux support, all that. So it's good. It's good to see that. We already answered this one. Do all the keys have analog sensors? Only game-specific keys? We've kind of gone through that. That's really, at the end of the day, it's up to the keyboard implementation.
Correct. Right? Yeah.
They might only do 4. They could do all of them.
They could do all of them. It would be really expensive using the sensors to the degree that we are for all the keys. It would be like buying 2 keyboards.
Is there any significant, and when I say significant, I mean relative to other keyboard mousing technology, like processing that has to happen on this? So like, what kind of compute capability does it take to run and kind of measure all of those analog sensors at
so
one time?
We're using an M0 Cortex processor that's running at 48 megahertz. So I know there was a question that was mentioned on the website. Someone was asking, like, so how much overhead is that going to cause? So the speed that processor is running at, it can measure all 12 keys in less than a millisecond. It's like 300 microseconds or something like that. So we can measure it 3 times in 1 millisecond before it even gets sent to the driver.
To the polling rate.
So there's zero impact because we're scanning at a fast enough.
So we don't need water cooling on that processor for this keyboard.
You
is what
could.
It comes down
I mean,
to.
no, probably not.
Okay. Let's see. What else do we have here? I assume that this will only be sold. This comes from WU2F.
Okay.
I assume this will only be sold in the linear MX variants, black, red, etc., to ensure practical analog use in game.
Very likely, yes. So I brought this other keyboard that has switches mounted that are different tactiles and clickies and things like that. It does definitely interfere with the smooth movement through the key press. There are some, I guess I could see if you are trying to market a keyboard that's specifically for RPGs or like League of Legends games where you have the first clicks feel is one key activation and the second bottom out is another key press.
Right.
You could have that be a compelling product for that particular market, but in general, the linear switches are the best.
Makes sense. From username pronunciations are tough. 9TOU, do analog switches have any benefit for productivity applications like typing or programming? And then we answered his Linux compatibility question.
So typing, if that's a compelling experience of just using it as a mouse, I could see that in office applications potentially. There's other things that I've delved into that people over the years have thrown out there and I've messed around with. So in music production and like visual overlays and things like that for DJs,
yep.
I've had them say, well, how about if I wanted to overlay this one video with the other one, a little bit control over that. You could do that with this acting as a MIDI controller.
Right.
So you could have that type of control.
I mean, I could see it adjusting like sliders in Premiere
right.
or Photoshop. My initial thought when I read that question was like, hey, the new MacBook with the control up top, like where they integrate sliders across
right.
it, like that. You could do that with analog keys.
Yeah, or you could use it in combination in Photoshop for brush pressure or something like that.
Yeah.
So you could stuff like that. So that there is wider applications in CAD manipulation and all sorts of things that potentially could come.
Onyx 1640 asks, I've run into games, Skyrim comes to mind, that don't work properly with the mouse when a controller is connected. Any comments on this?
Yep, that is a big problem with Skyrim. I don't know why they thought in their infinite wisdom to say, oh, there's an Xbox controller plugged in. Let's disable both the keyboard and the mouse. Why?
Yes.
Why?
Yeah.
Bethesda seems to be the only one that seems to think that that's a good idea, but it is an issue. So what a solution to the problem would be is a key on the keyboard that would completely disable the Xbox controller, and so it's no longer plugged into the system.
Right, which you could do just literally through the hardware on the keyboard. Again, no software needed to be installed or driver
right.
have to be installed for that. Yeah. Just like you get keys that disable the Windows button.
Yeah, exactly. Same type of thing.
Essentially the same type of thing. That's a good idea. There's a couple of good comments in here about just like a full analog keyboard that outputs MIDI would be pretty cool. Okay. That would be epic. So that's again, cost-wise, I don't know what that's gonna run, but an interesting idea nonetheless.
It has come up quite a bit. So I have programmed it to behave like a MIDI controller, and it is. I play musical instruments, but I'm not like a big music production kind of guy. Yeah. So I've had to ask other people so how exactly would you do that? And they gave me some pretty good ideas, but I could see it doing something.
That's pretty cool. So if people want to, so you're not selling it today, so the question now becomes, how do people follow along? How do people keep track of like where you're doing? They want to know when it's going to become available. Obviously, they should go to PCPer.com and we'll report on all that.
Sure.
But like, you have a YouTube channel where you upload videos where you kind of updates the prototypes and stuff like that? Yeah,
so I think our biggest following right now is on YouTube. It's just on youtube.com/Aimpad, amped, A-M-P-E-D.
Aimpad amped, yes.
Because the video series is called Amped about Aimpad.
Right.
So that's the biggest following we have. You could always go to our website and there's a little survey if you want to fill it out. It'll add to our mailing list on aimpad.com. Okay. They could also follow it that way.
That's pretty cool. That's it. I'm excited to spend more time with it. I know Ken has spent a little bit of time with it as well, and just seeing you kind of walk through some of the demos, even like the non-gaming ones about just seeing the different profiles and how they're all integrated is actually, it's easy to see how people in the chat and me like suddenly come up with all these interesting ideas. Maybe you could use it for this, or maybe you could do it for this type of stuff. So very cool. Again, thank you for driving down and doing the stream. It was a lot of fun. Aimpad.com is the URL. You can find all the information there from Lance, the principal engineer of awesomeness. Are there other engineers of awesomeness that you oversee with that title? Or
they engineer electrical or engineer mechanical, but I engineer awesome.
I can appreciate that. All right, everybody. So PCPer.com is the website where you can find our coverage of this, anything that changes going forward. I'm really looking forward to it. Do you foresee any like prototype changes in the near future that you can tease about like improving this?
No.
Nothing you want to say?
Nothing at this time that I can say, yeah.
All right. Well, we'll keep track on it, guys. So thank you, everybody, for joining us in the live stream. PCPer.com/subscribe is where you can go sign up for a mailing list if you want to know about these types of events that we host every once in a while, and we sent an email yesterday to everybody about this particular stream that we were having. So if you want to be a part of that, pcper.com/subscribe. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Lance.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this content, consider supporting in-depth technical content by contributing at patreon.com/pcper.